So good afternoon to everybody, and welcome back again, also in this hot summer. And as a member of the VeDPH, I'm very happy to give the welcome to Angus Mol from Leiden University, and our second external guest of this week. So it is a pleasure for me and for the entire team of the Venice Center for Digital and Public Humanities to have you here, Angus, and thank you very, very much to accept the invitation and to share with us your research work. And we are very interested about your topics. So, Angus, welcome to the Archaeological Strand.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank
No,
you.
It's as already said, great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, just a word to introduce you, Angus Mol, that is speaking from Leiden University in the Netherlands. And the first thing that I want to say from Angus that is very connected with the theme that he's going to speak today is a quotation from his profile that I love so much. Angus is interested in games for democratizing the past, for have to much more democratize access to the past. And I found it very, very interesting. Games as a tool for having a large audiences, a diverse audiences, but also tools and digital tools that are not only mere tools for disseminate and communicate the past, but they could provide theory perspective to understand better what we are trying to not only to communicate but also to digest, to interpret, and to reconsider. Angus is an expert not only in video games and gaming with archaeology in the past, but also with network analysis, GIS, and landscape archaeology. He worked in a lot of projects all over the world, but also in the Caribbean. He was part of the Nexus 1492 project, one of the biggest archaeological project in the world, we can say, was one of these big years project. And now he's back in Europe. I met him in Stanford, so we had the opportunity to see what he's doing in between network analysis and gaming while we were there. And he's also the co-founder of Value. I think that probably you are going to speak about it. I don't know. Yeah, absolutely. That is a foundation that develops and supports initiatives for interfacing academia and video games. I leave the floor to Angus, and thank you very much for joining us.
Wonderful. Let me share my screen. This is Google Meet is one of those platforms that I haven't had the pleasure of presenting on just yet. So let's just see how this will go. Let me first switch on my slideshow. There we go. And then let's see if we can. So if I sometimes look to the right, that's because you are all on my right-hand screen and my presentation is right in front of me. So that's why I'm talking. If I'm talking to you, I'll try to talk into the camera, but sometimes I'm talking towards this general direction. There you go. And then yes, this should work out. Is this visible to everyone?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. Sorry, I realized before that my camera was off. Sorry, I didn't for that.
No problem. I'm kind of used to looking at a large sort of blank row of black row of images.
I take the advantage also for to remind everyone that for every reason, turn on your mic and have question or everything if there are technical problems. Thank you very much.
Yes, definitely. But feel free to ask questions in between this, during this talk as well. And maybe my first question, which I normally do, and I've never tried it in an online version yet, is to just pick out in random some of the people in the audience and ask what the last game is that they've played. So maybe, since Jake was already talking, what is the last game that you've played?
So not related to archaeology.
It doesn't matter at all. Whatever game you played recently.
Yesterday in trade, I was doing these stupid things, lumosity, sorry, that is the brain training.
Yeah, not
game.
stupid at all. A smart game,
Yeah.
very good.
Yes, it
Very
is.
good. So I'll just randomly try and call out some names that I see pop up in my screen. Oh, there it is on the screen. Yeah, it's a fun way to keep you busy with your with your mind. So if Lucia or Landy, if you are able to talk or
Yes,
chat,
definitely.
what is the last game that you've played?
Actually,
You're playing a game right now.
No, actually not. But I must say I have to let's say to go back quite a few years ago. I think I was playing Age of Empire 2 on a PC. Yeah. I'm sorry
game.
that will be a kind of a new discovery, a rediscovery of the gaming for me, because it has been since a long time that I haven't played. So thank you.
Yeah, but that's definitely one of those classical historical games, right? Age of Empires 2.
Yeah.
So let's see. Somebody else I see pop on my screen is Sofia Bulgarini. Are you able to chat or talk?
Hi. Yeah, I don't even play with video games, but I'm trying to learn something with my boyfriend, and I began playing with Pokemon games.
Nice, very nice. So the Pokemon games. That's a nice game to start with, and it's also nice to play games together, especially as a way of doing a bit of bonding and connecting to somebody across maybe different spaces, or maybe while you're in the same place, trying to have some fun during these lockdown times.
True,
right?
true.
Yes. Yeah, I think that we will see in general that the game industry has massively benefited from this in terms of numbers from this particular crisis. So maybe the last one. I'm sorry if I don't pronounce your name correctly. Yashishwini. And I don't see the
hi.
Hi.
I generally don't play video games, but generally I play puzzles and other things. So Sudoku, and if we are a group, then probably some other games we Ludo like that we play. Otherwise, it's a Sudoku.
Yeah. Okay, Sudoku. Well, that's definitely playing, and that's game-like, right? It's a puzzle game for sure. I mean, the general point of this is that it will be very difficult to find somebody that has no recollection of the last game that they played, or the last time that they played something, right? Because everybody plays. Sometimes we do it a long time ago, and for whatever reason in our lives, it's something that we just doesn't fit in with our current practices anymore. But everybody can connect to this thing that is play, that is games, right? And many people, as I will just talk about in a couple of minutes, play games that have to do something with the past. And generally, I'm very interested in how games, or just play in general, right? This can be just beyond video games or board games, but play in general provides experiences of the past, provides access to the past. This is something that is so very digital, because of course a lot of these games are digital. They're video games. There's also things that you can look at digitally, which I will talk about a little bit later. But it also can be about analog games that you play. So it's a very broad field. The whole point of it is to understand how we play with the past, why we play with the past, and how, as people that are interested in studying the past, but also talking about the past to a larger public, how we can use that potential of play. So let me see. Yes. So the challenge here is that massive numbers of people have positive, right? Nice, stimulating, fun, but still relatively narrow and shallow experiences with the past in today's digital playgrounds. People want to play and learn about authentic pasts. As if they are playing a game that is about the past, they want something real there, right? But the vast majority of play takes place without any direct communication with the channels that produce knowledge about the past. And those channels, of course, would be us, right? The disciplines, the academic disciplines, or otherwise professional historians, archaeologists, and other people that study the past. The vast majority of games are being made without any direct communication. This is getting a little bit better, but without any direct communication or sustained communication with people like us, people that know a lot about the past. And then there's also lots of opportunities here, because digital playgrounds, or playgrounds in general, are places and things that can and need to be studied archaeologically, with an eye for human agents, historical processes, and cultural contexts. So games, and particularly video games, are things that you can also study archaeologically. And at the same time, play creates an opening to drag theory and method, so our academic practice, out of the ivory tower comfort zone, and creates a place where, well, more or less, in the present, we can come out to play with the past. So these are the two things that are sort of on the background of what I'm talking about today. These are the challenges and opportunities here. So I'm very much influenced by this group of people, the Value Foundation, which is, well, the names are popping up right here. A couple of years ago, we started this research project based on our shared love for the past and for play and for games. And we just decided to start doing things around that. After a couple of years, we incorporated into an organization as we started to leave Leiden University. A little bit more on what we've done in the next slide. But beyond that, there's this much larger community of archaeologists and related people from related disciplines, or sometimes completely different disciplines, that collect themselves under the, well, quite literally under the Twitter hashtag. So on Twitter is where you find most people be active on this, around this field, under the hashtag of Archaeogaming. This is an image that is not made by myself, but it's made by Andrew Reinhardt, the person who wrote Archaeogaming and also coined the term, and Sean Graham, a digital historian from Carleton University in Canada. And as you can see, just looking at it, we're not going to go through the whole list, but archaeogaming touches upon a lot of different things. So there's real-world archaeology of video game hardware and software. There's the famous, the first at the top, the Atari burial ground, when Andrew Reinhardt did an excavation of the worst video game ever, E.T., something that was led the whole game industry, that's the urban myth, to crash in the early 80s, and then later excavated in the 2012, if I remember correctly. But also video game or virtual worlds as archaeological site. There's lots of philosophical or ideological tenets in there. Game reception, game development, machine-created culture, the archaeology of XXX game titles, and material culture in virtual spaces. There's lots of different things and different practices that happen under this hashtag of archaeogaming. And I would say this image was made a couple of years ago, in 2015. It has only grown, the amount of things that are happening. So I will mostly talk about the things that we've done, that I've done as a researcher, but that we've also done through Value. So Value, as I already said, started now already 5 years ago as a project, a very informal project. There was no money really. There was just a group of people that wanted to get together around games. And the first thing that we actually started doing was we started live streaming. Well, the first thing we started doing was sitting on a couch together, play some games and talk about it. But the second thing we did was live streaming. And after that, we found out relatively quickly there was this whole community around this archaeogaming community. And we decided that it would be good to bring these people together as part of a conference. It became the Interactive Past Conference. The third one of which is now already out. I'm not entirely sure if you'll be able to see my arrow if I use it to point out things, but all the way at the right end of the screen, the Tipsy 3, the Interactive Past Conference 3, is happening in some sort of hybrid online-offline fashion this fall. And we've done a lot of our other different things. So we do research, we also do public projects. I'll talk a little bit about that. And we still keep on live streaming as well. The whole core mission of Value is this idea already that I talked about, is the idea of the ivory tower, so academia, right, meeting the playground. And at the core of the foundation that we've created around this idea is a couple of very simple philosophies, really. That we want to do this in a playful way. So it's really, even if research and all sorts of other things can be serious, they can also be playful at the same time, in an accessible way. So it's really something that is meant to be enjoyed and experienced by a large range in terms of quantity, but also in terms of diversity of people. But at the same time, knowledge is really at the core of all of this. Knowledge and this deeper understanding and love for the past. By the way, completely aside, if you want to play a fun, it's almost not a game, or at least the game developer doesn't call it a game. But if you want to have something soothing and fun to play around with, Townscaper, it's a game that only costs €5. It's just out on Steam. The game that I used to make this image with. absolutely wonderful little game. So that's Townscaper. I can definitely recommend that as a game to relax with a little bit. The first thing that I'll be talking about is about the past as a playground. So what sort of past do we already see in our digital playgrounds right now? The first thing to maybe still say is that video games are really big business. The video game industry is the biggest, maybe, or definitely one of the biggest entertainment industries on Earth, set to only grow, and these are already old numbers from 2018. I think that we will see, as I already said, with this particular crisis going on, that the video game industry's revenue market value has only grown in 2020 beyond any expectation. So there's big bucks going on in this particular business, and most of these big bucks are, of course, very much focused towards entertainment, toward creating fun for people. So most of it is not about this deeper understanding of the past or this deeper understanding of whatever topic, but at the same time, these things all sort of get caught up in this enormous entertainment industry. At the same time, as this is a big industry, it's also a big community, because quite literally everyone and their mother plays video games. The average gamer, this is data from the US, 46%. We still have the stereotype, right, of this young adolescent boy sitting in his mother's basement playing games. But in reality, 46% of all gamers are female, and the slight majority is still male, and that the average age for people that play games is, in their 30s. So it's not at all something that only young people do. And there's all sorts of other things that come together with gaming as a hobby or gaming as an activity that suggest, at least this is, of course, from a gaming advocacy organization, the Entertainment Software Association, but to suggest that it is it's becoming more and more a valued activity to undertake as well. So, not out yet, but in October we've done our own survey, particularly of historical gamers, and the numbers of this are a little bit different, but in general, on the sort of the idea of valuing what people do in historical games, are very much the same. But the numbers are, as we will discuss in October during the conference, are quite different on the gender side of things. And at the same time, something that we also don't often realize is that video games are not only often about old things, but they are themselves already a very old medium. This is the very first historical game, so a game with a historical component that was made, the Sumerian game. That's already from 1964. In 1964, there was this experiment with school kids in the United States in which they were playing this game that was about you were playing a steward of an ancient Near Eastern city, and you had to make sure that your people, that you set enough food, you invested enough food, and you make sure your people survive. So this also means that there's already a lot of history to games itself, right? And that aside from looking at history through games, you can also use it as just an object of historical inquiry yourself. The fields that are part of this study at the intersection of past and play are very diverse. I think it all starts with Huizinga's, who was a Leiden professor, I have to say, a Leiden University professor, used to be a Leiden University professor, who was very famous for his book. In English, it's called Waning of the Middle Ages. He's one of the founding fathers of, or the founding figures of culture history as a discipline. But he also wrote this Homo Ludens book, in which he went for the Dutch, because it's written in Dutch. Beschaving komt op en ontplooit zich in spel als spel. Civilization arises and develops as a game, or in games, but also as a game. And one of the core things there is the magic circle of play. That games are this set aside thing in our realities that are connected to what we normally do, but have their own rules, their own sort of quite literally their own spaces, time spaces to engage with. Of course, this was the foundational text for game studies. Game studies is a very important field if you are interested in games, right? There's this whole field out there like literary studies, comparable to something like literary studies or film studies that studies games. Game history, as already said earlier, is also very important, and then particularly platform studies. So that's really looking at the hardware of this sort of thing, as well as media archaeology, which is this Foucaultian-inspired form of looking at the media that we use and how the media that we use also, end up shaping our own realities. And then games in history. And games in history is already something that is, growing or has started as a subfield a little bit earlier maybe than in archaeology, with such books as, for example, Gaming the Past by Jeremiah McCall, and quite of a seminal work right now, at least in history, is Adam Chapman's Digital Games as History. One of the things that is most influential for us as a group of people is the work by Ian Bogles, the cultural philosopher and game developer, in which he puts the idea of playgrounds, in Play Anything, his book Play Anything, he puts the idea of playgrounds central. And a playground for Ian Bogles is something that has boundaries and content that is experienced as fun. And fun is any activity that is related to with commitment, attention, and care. So from that perspective, the past is a playground, right? Because you can put boundaries around a certain part of the past, and you can have content in it that is fun. That is quite literally what games are doing. But if you think about it, if you think about fun as an activity that is related to with commitment, attention, and care, scholarship of the past can also be framed as something that is fun. Can also be framed as its own playground, right? So this is a very influential work for the things that we do. At the same time, it's of course very nice what the academics end up thinking and doing with the past and play, but there are a lot of people that are just putting it into practice, right? They're playing games that are about the past every single day. So we've done a little study. I've done a little study based on data from Steam. So Steam is one of the two world's biggest game playing and also platforms, but also a storefront for games, so where you can sell your games. And this is something we did in 2018. We just got at that time, 23,985 games on Steam. Now there's many more already. And the interesting thing is that Steam has applied tags to the games. Well, not Steam has done it, but the users of Steam can apply tags to the games that they play. For example, they can tag a game as adventure, single player, nice soundtrack, all sorts of different things. In total, there are 340 tags that people can apply to a game at that point in time. And we had a little look at people that apply, not people, but we had a look at games that were applied with a historical tag. 372 games of those 22,985 were explicitly tagged as being historical. It doesn't mean that the other games did not have anything historical in it, but these were explicitly tagged as such. So with those tags, and this is a little bit, so if you're into network analysis, this will be familiar to you. You can use these tags, which is just a basic recommender system, to understand how sort of games are made out of different components. So for example, as the historical game can also be a grand strategy game, a type of strategy game, but it can also be a first-person shooter, right? So a game like Battlefield 1, which is set in the First World War, is a historical game, will be tagged as a historical game, but will also be tagged as a first-person shooter game. An absolutely crazy game like Duke Nukem from the 90s, nothing historical about it except that it is from the 90s, and it's just a first-person shooter, right? So, and then if sort of by looking at the cross connections between these tags, you can look at what, for example, a game that is tagged as being historical has in common. So from that, this is the network that of all the tags that are applied to games that are also tagged as being historical games. And based on that, we've done a small modularity measure. So we're looking at the communities, the sub-communities within this network. So all of these tags are part of historical games, but then there's further subdivisions to be made based on the strength of connection between individual tags. And you can see that it falls apart in 3 families. So basically speaking, the type of games that people are playing fall apart in roughly 3 categories or 3 families of games. So to highlight these briefly, these are strategy games. These are games that are, for example, tagged as being medieval or co-op, or strategy, well, strategy, of course, but turn-based strategy have a lot of replay value, real-time with pause, moddable, meaning you can change part of the game as a player yourself. City builders have tanks in it. This is a bit of a weird one, but okay. And then action adventure. This is the type of Assassin's Creed, quite literally here, right over here, and on the top it says Assassin. The type of action adventure, symbolized by the Assassin's Creed series, in which it's an open world. There's a lot of exploration going on, frequently third person, meaning the camera is behind the player. RPG elements, role-playing elements, so all sorts of stats that have to do with your character, so very character-driven, story-rich as well. And then there's a further category of the shooters. So first-person shooters, quite literally, but are very much about action and realism, at least from the point of the players that play it, particularly from the graphical perspective, right? So very realistic graphics and oftentimes sounds as well. So I think what you are able to see here is that what I was just talking about earlier is that there's this there's diversity within historical games, but it's also very narrow and shallow in the sense that a lot of the games that are played by people, or at least tagged as such on Steam, are games that are, have some form of violence in them. That's even true for the strategy games that I will talk a little bit more in depth about later. But they're always, at the very least, they're a conflictual way of engaging with others in the past, whether that's quite literally to assassinating other people or shooting other people, or by conquering other people's civilizations or empires through a strategy game approach. So this is what I'm pointing at when there's even within the super high diversity of games in terms of super high quantity of games on Steam, there's still a core that is very much about this conflictual way of experiencing the past. So I will delve, I could talk about these three categories for a long time, but I will delve a little bit deeper into Sid Meier's Civilization, which is an example of a strategy game and how Sid Meier's Civilization deals with the past. So we've done a lot of work on this. I think by now we've live streamed. So just by live streaming alone, I think we've live streamed up close to 100 hours of this game alone. So that's Ares Polytopoulos and myself who have done a lot of research on this game. We also wrote a short review of Civilization 6 in Advances in Archaeological Practice, which is available through open access. So if you're interested in knowing a bit more in depth or referencing to this work, that's something you could go to. So Civilization is a game that was developed by Sid Meier and Bruce Shelley in 1991, or a little bit before that, but it was published in 1991 by Micropose. Civ 5 in 2000 came out in 2010 and sold 33 million copies over its lifetime. Civ 6, which came out in 2016, sold 1 million copies in the first 2 weeks. And currently, this was a couple of years ago, actually, it already had between 2.5 to 5 million units sold. But I think right now, many more, because it was actually a game that was given away for free a couple of weeks ago on another storefront for digital games. So probably a lot of people are playing that right now. You used to have access to these numbers through Steam Spy, but that's unfortunately a platform that's not working anymore. So those are big numbers, but another thing that's a big number that puts things a little bit more into perspective is the fact that the developers have come out and said that on Steam alone, Civilization 5 between 2010 and 2016 was played for 1.2 billion hours. So to put that very large number into a bit more perspective, that is still more or roughly equivalent. The numbers are, of course, a bit circumstantial, but roughly equivalent to the amount of time that people spend, so collectively, humankind collectively spend in the biggest 6 museums in the world, right? So the Musée du Louvre, National Museum of China, Metropolitan Museum of Art, Vatican Museum, British Museum, and the Tate Modern. If you pull all the visitor hours of these museums together, you'll get the amount of hours that people have been playing Sid Meier's Civilization 5. Of course, many more people have been visiting those museums because there's a lot of people that play Sid Meier's Civilization 5 for a long time. But still, in terms of collective hours spent by humanity, this is the amount, this is sort of the cultural force of one single game series like Sid Meier's Civilization 5. By the way, if there's any questions, I'll try to look at the chat or just feel free to speak up. So what you do in Civilization, the series, and if many of you have probably heard of it or have even played it, but the idea is that players strive to become ruler of the world by establishing and leading a civilization from the dawn of man into the space age. So you start at the dawn of man, right? At least that's according to Civilization 5. So we're talking roughly 3000 BC, and they try to lead their civilization into the space age. They do that by waging war, conducting diplomacy, discovering new technologies, and going head to head with some of history's greatest leaders and building a very powerful empire. So, for example, you could play as George Washington of the American civilization, or Julius Caesar of the Roman civilization. You can even play the Dutch civilization as William of Orange, for example, or Queen Juliana. There's a lot of different civilizations represented here. But even so, as I will explain later, there's still quite a narrow range of not only things that you can do, but also a narrow range of types of civilizations there. Interestingly, the sort of earliest creator and still very influential person in the development of Sid Meier's civilization, particularly Sid Meier, has this statement out there, a couple of statements like this actually out there in interviews, that when they were making civilizations or the game of civilization, one of their fundamental goals was not to project their own philosophy or politics onto things, because Sid Meier thought that playing somebody else's political philosophy is not fun for the player. Let's see, how am I doing in time? All right. And this, other statements like this, you'll see them frequently by bigger game publishers or bigger game developers. For example, here by a Ubisoft CEO. So Ubisoft is the company that makes the Assassin's Creed games. People like to put politics into our games, and we back away from those interpretations. We don't want to take a stance in current politics because, for example, it is bad for business. So just to say, it's as if there was some sort of mega director of all these 6 museums. And that mega director of that museum said, these museums don't really have any sort of political philosophy, or we don't really want to project our politics onto things. Which is, of course, if a museum director would say something like that, you'd find it quite problematical. But simply because it is something that is a game, it is something that has gone mostly unnoticed, at least to people that deal with the past, right? And of course, civilization is not an apolitical concept, right? All the way from Sigmund Freud's Civilization and its discontent, it was already proven to be very ideologically entrenched. Norbert Elias, the civilizing process, is another variant of this. And quite more recently, David Wengrow, What Makes Civilization? Focusing on the ancient Near East and the future of the West. So civilization as a concept is very critical for archaeologists, but also for a larger range of humanities scholars, right? And very often we have this still normative understanding of it. The civilization means progress, right? We start without civilization and we end up in civilization and we end up advancing civilization. The way that you do that in Civilization is roughly speaking through 4 ways, right? So Civ is a 4X game, and that's sort of a subgenre of games, and that stands for exploring, expanding, exploiting, and exterminating. So that's roughly the things that you'll do in sequence in a game of Civilization. First, you'll explore the territory, quite literally the territory around your cities. Then you expand your empire. You'll exploit other players, other civilizations, and you try to exterminate them or at least otherwise dominate them. For example, through all sorts of different victories. So if you play a game like Civilization, you get a sense that it's trying to give this very progressive feel towards the past, right? Very much marching towards an end goal, teleological, right? The end that sort of you go through a technology tree where you end up always in more or less the technologies that we have today. It's very euphemistic. For example, it will call things that are clearly meant to be inspiring or to be reminiscent of historical fascism, things like order or other sorts of things like a tyranny. And it's at the same time, it's very rationalist. So there's lots of numbers and things happening. It's not very about bodily experience. It's very much about managing systems, rather. And it has a huge focus on Western histories and values. And if you're interested in how particularly in all the different ways that it's deeply political, as I said, we have like an archive of 100 hours of us playing this game live on Twitch. And you can just more or less open one of these streams and we already will talk about the different ways that this game series provides a perspective on the past. To zoom in a little bit, so archaeology in Civ 6 has this following sort of, so you can do archaeology in Civ 6. That's the first thing. So archaeology is in there, not as a technology, but as a civic, which is something that, like a cultural thing, more like a thing that civilizations do that is not technology. So the very first thing that you'll get in the game is that has to do with archaeology is the civic humanism. Humanism will allow you, for example, to build an archaeological museum, very reminiscent of the antiquity cabinets, right? But strangely enough, as this moment that you can buy this archaeological museum or build this archaeological museum, you cannot yet do anything with it because you don't have an archaeologist just yet. No, first you have to explore or discover colonialism as a civic, after which this tree of possibilities will open into a natural history. And natural history will give you access to an archaeologist as a unit that you can move around on the map and explore all sorts of different archaeological sites with. So clearly, we may not disagree with it, but clearly the game here, just through a small system, a small game mechanic around archaeology, takes a very specific political stance on what the roots of archaeologists are, right? It's a humanist, but then also very much a colonialist and a natural historical undertaking. And aside from that, natural history also gives you access to all sorts of other interesting things. For example, like the Hermitage as a world wonder, or a zoo, a water park, all sorts of other fun things, right? So archaeologists are part of that. And natural history then leads to conservation as a thing. So what that looks like in the game is something like this. Here we have our archaeological unit. In this case, it's the archaeological unit is called Laetitia. Even if this is probably meant to be a feminine name, we can see that the unit itself doesn't look very female at all, at least biologically speaking, right? And as we can also see that right here on the map, this very characteristic pith helmet that is so reminiscent of what supposedly archaeologists all wore in the past, or at least reminiscent and connected to the explorations that we were doing in the 19th, 20th century, early 20th century. And this is an archaeological site right in the middle. And you can see right here that this archaeological site is very much a site that is, well, first of all, it's not a site that you would often come across as an archaeologist, right? But it's this very classical understanding of what archaeologists look at. Not that there's anything wrong with the classical understanding, but this is once again to show the very narrow view of this game on what archaeology is. It excavates ruins quite literally, and these ruins are all reminiscent of some sort of vaguely Mediterranean culture. Interestingly enough, this what you can do is excavate this, and if you find an artifact, this is indicated in the game by an icon of a dinosaur. So that's I'll leave that for whatever it is. And then after that, you get an artifact that you get to choose what side of a conflict that has taken place in the game's past. So you'll do things in the past of the game that will lead to the creation of archaeological sites later on in modern times. And you get to choose which artifact that you want to uncover from that site. So one from the civilization of Arabia, or a barbaric artifact. Barbarians are, I can talk about this for ages, are another sort of faction that is not everything that all the units on the map that are not civilizations, they are barbarians. And then you excavate something like this, relatively generically named mask, which is probably of some sort of African origin, and that is in fact an Arabian, supposed to be an Arabian mask, right? And this will be displayed in one of the archaeological museums in the game. So you can see that there's all sorts of understandings of archaeology, but at the same time there's also a messing up of what archaeologists end up doing. So not a truly following up with what archaeologists end up doing. And you just, as I said, deposit it in a museum. So archaeology is a scientific field. There's archaeological sites appear in the landscapes when they're recognized as such. I didn't actually go into that. And you find stuff of the things your civilization did previously in the game. These are all sort of neat little things in a game like Civilization. There's only male archaeologists. It's very much connected to colonialism. There's no attempt to connect finds to actual cultures like that existed in the world. And dig sites are very much the same across the world. It doesn't matter if you are in, the Mayan civilization's territory. It will still look like the ruins of the classical period. And there's this confusion between paleontology and archaeology. in the interest of time, I'm going to move quickly a little bit with the next example. One of the things that you can do in this game is you can build wonders. Wonders are these unique buildings that are a big investment. You can think of wonders in Civilization 6 a little bit like the idea of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, meet the idea of contemporary World Heritage sites. So, for example, you can build the Colossus, the pyramids, the Sistine Chapel, the Pentagon, or the Estadio de Maracanã, the Brazilian football stadium in Civilization 6. All sorts of these large built, unique, immobile heritages. That it matters whether your wonder is in the game, so that this is an effect on real world popularity, is shown by this particular Google search trend. So just the Google search popularity of this particular word, Huehueteocalli. Huehueteocalli is a different word for the Templo Mayor or the Great Temple of Tenochtitlan. It's very much a different word because it's in Nahuatl, the indigenous language of the Aztec and some other Mesoamerican indigenous people. And when this was first announced for Civilization 6, this particular inclusion of this wonder in the game, people didn't know about Huehueteocalli because this was not a term that they knew. If you'd said Templo Mayor is in the game, then people that played Civilization had already played with the Templo Mayor in Civilization 6, for example, or 4, for example. So what happened when this particular thing was introduced, people went massively to Google and started Googling what this thing means, the Huehueteocalli, right? So this is the exact announcement of this thing. And you can see that it has its highest search popularity in 6 months. So people, for example, looking at promo images, this was part of a promo video of the game, end up still looking for information on these things online. So, for example, if you're the caretaker of the Great Temple of Tenochtitlan, you probably got a lot more interest or a lot more Google search hits during that time. At the same time, this is also a little bit of a problem, because if you look, in fact, at the geographic spread of wonders in the games from Civilization 1 to 6, you will see that they're very much, very much focused around specific regions in the world. So there's a lot of different wonders in the game, but most of them, by far, all come from the United States. And then a slightly smaller number come from the Mediterranean, England, France, Germany, some. But as you can see, there's large stretches of the world, particular South America, but in particular Africa, that supposedly doesn't have any of these unique wonders to be building, except for some other things like Timbuktu, for example, like sort of very things that very much capture the imagination. So this is an overview of that geographically. This isn't very strange, because when the game was originally made by Sid Meier, who put the first wonders in the game, he very much based his idea of what should be on there on the Macmillan World History Fact Finder. This is this World Historical Atlas written by a Briton. That's a nice rhyme, written by a Briton. And that was very much this very classical understanding of world history. It talked about the classical civilizations and then the Near Eastern civilizations, and not very much about anything else. And still to this day, that dynamic that was put in the game in 1991 is still very much present. The other source that Sid Meier relied on was American Heritage, which was this very popular journal, a weekly magazine, or monthly magazine that came out in the States, United States in the 80s and 70s, 80s and early 90s. At the same time, people do actively engage with this because they do a lot of modding in the game. So they introduce all sorts of wonders into the game to sort of things that they feel should be in the game. So these are things that you can go to Steam and you can download. And for example, you could play with, the Buddhas of Bamiyan wonder in your game, or the Puokoli Hayao wonder, right? This sort of the voyages of the Polynesians, and all sorts of other things. Or some people don't want to have any world wonders in their games, and some people think that the NHL and the NFL are also world wonders that are worthy of putting in a game like Civilization. At the end of Civilization, there are 4 things that can roughly happen. You can dominate. Well, 5 things that you can dominate. You can win a science victory, you can win a religious victory, or you can win a culture victory. So these are really the only ways that a game like Civilization can end up. Diplomacy victory is the new introduction right now. And it's interesting that a game like Civilization can even have an ending, right? So what happens at the end of Civilization? Well, nothing really much happens. The game is done. You're sort of done. You conquered the whole world. And this is also something that, culturally speaking, has a very deep connection, we feel, to something that was very popular, or not very popular, but it was a popular idea in the early 90s. particularly the idea of the end of history. So this is a book from 1992 by Francis Fukuyama, which is roughly around the same time that Civilization 1 first came out, where he talks about the idea that no, it's not the end of the Cold War, but we see the end of history as such, because we now have this universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. The end of history will be a very sad time, Francis Fukuyama said. I think there we can be clear that the end of history is not very much a sad time, because at least what happened in his period of the end of history, which we now know wasn't really end of history at all, of course, lots of people started playing games like Civilization. Well, ideas like this, the idea of what is the end state of civilization, quite literally the end state of history, are still, of course, very popular in more recent work like by Yuval Noah Harari. So, briefly recapitulating here, and do I roughly still have 10 minutes left, or should I be wrapping up now?
You can, sorry, I didn't tell you before, but you can have a little bit more time, because we have a half an hour of space time before the next lab that is 4:30, and people will remain with us.
I'm sure you also want to have some breaks, so I will not keep you overly long, but to sort of synthesize this part of it. So what we do, of course, when we play video games like Sid Meier's Civilization, but all the other video games that when we get to engage in past play, that we play with the past, and it's super popular. And we have to understand that there's this commercialization of the past that is going on. Right? This is part of the entertainment industry, and the present politics of the past play deeply into that. But at the same time, when we play a game like Civilization, the past also ends up playing with us, right? Because there are certain things in a game like Civilization that ends up provoking play. The idea of this ever sort of progress, it's not necessarily things that factually happened in the past, but these things that we feel about the past end up provoking us into play with it. In particular, specific and quite narrow, if you think about it, patterns. The idea of going through an endless civil empire building, civilization and empire building, right? Or the idea of going through endless wars in or other forms of interpersonal violence in games like Assassin's Creed. And we also allows us to really play through again and again and again the past mistakes that we've made. Civilization is not a game where you cannot be a non-colonial entity or a non-empirical entity, right? You simply will not be able to progress in any meaningful way or play the game in any meaningful way. So very much the playgrounds that we have are very much bound by the histories that brought us there. So this is a very interesting sort of interface or intersection that takes place in the games that we play today. So one of the things that we want to do is really study that in depth, and that's what we're going to be doing at Leiden University. We're going to look at the past in play. So we're also going to look at how we played in the past, but also the past as play in something that's called the Past at Play Lab. This is an initiative in which we will quite literally invite people to play games in a lab setting, games that have to do with the past. We will try to capture all sorts of data about that game playing through qualitative research, but also to digital data, so digital tracking of what people are doing in their games. So if they're playing board games, we're going to film that, and we're going to make sure that we have digital data, digitized data available to analyze step by step what happens in a game that they've been playing. Same, of course, also goes with video games that they're playing. So this is an initiative that is happening. It's already underway now in terms of the thing is being set up. The methodologies are being put into place, and we're going to go live. At least the idea was early in September, but now we're going to go live with this for the public in early October. But there's other ways that we can use past play for playing with the public, and this will be sort of the tail end of this presentation, in which I talk a little bit more about. We talked about the research that you can do about games that allows you to understand how games play with the past, but you can also do a lot of playing with the past and do this directly for or with the public. So, as I already talked before, this archaeogaming community is very much a grassroots initiative. It is something that started to happen and exist through people that were playing games and at the same time had also some sort of interest in the past, and they started to see some connections there, quite literally, as we also did with Value. They just got together and said, hey, there's something here, right? So a good example of that is Tara Copplestone, who used to blog under the name Gaming Archeo, Electric Archaeology by Sean Graham, Play the Past, which was a platform that is a little bit defunct now, I think, collective of historians and archaeologists that were writing about this. Another very interesting person to follow, who's very active still today, is Florence Smith Nichols. They are blogging, but also writing all sorts of other fanzines and all sorts of other things. Archaeogaming used to be run by Andrew Reinhardt, but is now taken over by somebody else or by a group of other people from the University of Florida. And then there's Interactive Past. And just to show you what an online platform can mean for public outreach or doing history and gaming in a public way. I'm just going to show you quite literally the homepage of the Interactive Past right now. So if you want, you can also go to interactivepast.com and just have a little look at it yourself. So right now on our homepage, you will find game previews. So we write, and this is something we do with a group of about 6 people. And particularly right now, we've had our first intern at the Value Foundation, who's very active, a master student from the University of Utrecht. So he wrote a lot of news and other sort of items. So we have game previews, news things, in-depth essays as well, particular games. So this is the writing part of it. We do a lot of that, which is very much popular scientific. At the same time, I already alluded to it a couple of times, we do live streams every Tuesday and Thursday on this platform called Twitch. Twitch.tv is this massive platform in which people watch other people play games, and we are one of the people that you can watch to play games. YouTube videos, of course, also part of that, and being very much active on Twitter. This is a very much a place where you can where we can talk to very much scholarly, much more scholarly focus. But this thing is, of course, is out there for everybody to see. There's setting something like this up by yourself, if you're interested in doing public outreach, is a bit hard, but if you do it with a small collective, this is something that you can already start to do. And it is, of course, an example of games, but there's all sorts of different ways. And if you're interested in this sort of thing, the moment to start building and working with your own web platforms is really here, because it is quite simple. You don't have to be a technical expert to do something like this at all. Far from it, I would say. Aside from sort of playing in public or writing about how you play in public, what we also do is we also try to play with the public. And one of the things that we've done there, which I think is one of the most fun things that we've done as the Value Foundation, is the Romeinkraft, which works wonderfully as a pun in Dutch, because it's Romeinen, Romans, and then Minecraft, the very popular digital building game, as one sort of project. So we were we had this interactive, playful, and creative approach to the recreation of the Roman limes, so the Dutch Roman border in the Netherlands, where we visited 14, actually in the end it was 16 galleries, libraries, or ateliers or museums in sort of the limes provinces of South Holland, Gelderland, and Limburg. And we invited people to come and play with us there. So people of all ages, but of course, a lot of people that came and played with us, literally built with us, were kids, of course. At the same time, while the kids were coming in, we were also able to talk about heritage, and particularly Roman heritage, with a lot of people. So in total, we had something like, we had more than 500 builders in total, and 2,000 people that we sort of had other chats about with heritage in the context of this Minecraft recreation of the past. So what does this look like in practice? We brought in some computer equipment on which the game Minecraft was installed, and we would sit down, in this case in the hall of the National Museum of Antiquities, which is in Leiden, and would play these games. And we would, as you say, these are pre-COVID-19 times, so we were able to come quite close to the people that were playing. This is something that we have to figure out a way of still making these events happen somehow. And people were building, and we were, as you can also see, discussing this thing. At the same time, there was always one master builder. This is Aris Politopoulos, who was also building something that was a bit more archaeologically accurate. Let's put it, because of course you can imagine that there's all sorts of things being built. So this is an example of one of the things that we built, the Roman fort of Matilo, which is something that was still beneath the soil close to Leiden. Hasn't been excavated, but we know through ground penetrating radar and some other things where it is, and some other aspects of it. And this is just, well, you can't really see it, but outside there's this vicus, right? This Roman settlement around, well, this is not Roman, but this indigenous settlement around the camp. And we were building this together with a lot of people. So we gave them instructions. So here you see Roman barracks, or the principia, so the commanders, resident, and at the same time there are also lots of people building other things around there. And what happens when you do something like this, you get to have all sorts of conversations about what heritage is, literally what it was in the past, but also what it means to people. So for example, I have an upcoming paper about this. There's a paper about this right now in the Journal of Computer Applications in Archaeology called Romans and Roller Coasters. But I have another paper particularly focusing on sort of the theory building that we were doing during this. So we were doing outreach. People were learning about, but particularly just having fun with Roman heritage. And at the same time, we were also learning all sorts of things about how people were thinking about it, and sometimes came up with quite interesting and lateral ideas, right? This is an example of a particular thing in there, which is called the tree house watchtower. This was a kid that had an idea that, across the river, this is where the barbarians would be, the Germans would be, and he was just very sort of stumped by the idea that the Romans would just sit there in their fort, so obviously visible, right? So the idea that why would they be so visible if they were, trying to defend themselves from these scary barbarians across the world? So he thought, like, why would you have a normal watchtower if you could also have a treehouse watchtower? So, and the whole game world is filled with things like this, or the multiple game worlds that we made are filled with little creative touches that makes you think slightly different about the histories that you think as an archaeologist so well. And there's so many different examples of that there. So this is just a small highlight from this particular project. I could also talk for an hour about all the things that we experienced here with the people that we were doing. Another thing that you can do as well, and this is something that I would have done as part of the virtual summer school, is game making. Game making is more accessible than ever. It can be very complex, especially if you want to go for a commercial game, right? Then you would want to work together with professional game developers. But there's all sorts of ways that you can start experimenting with what game making entails, and even make some products that are kind of nice and just fun. So one of the biggest democratizers of game making is Unity, a game engine that is available for free if you're just interested in playing around with it personally. And it's a very powerful platform. You have to know a bit of coding to make your game work, and particularly C#, but it's there. And there's many other of these game engine platforms out there. Just another example is Love 2D, which is a game engine platform which you also know a little bit of coding for, which is otherwise very free, open source, and user friendly. Roblox, which is this platform in which people play games, but also in which people make games for other games. It's a huge platform. It's almost the biggest user base, like Minecraft, like towards 100 million users in a platform like Roblox, in which a lot of people build all sorts of interesting things that we as archaeologists or heritage managers or historians don't really have any idea of. There's lots of different games that you can play, for example, with Romans in Roblox, or medieval times, or I'm sure that there's some simulation or some game version of Venice in there. And the thing that I wanted to do with you is Twine. So Twine, if you want to check out game making yourself, the thing that I would recommend to do is to start with Twine. You can find it at twinery.org, and it's just an absolutely lovely little platform that will quite literally allow you to make your first interactive narratives, game-like texts. So it's a text-based game platform in 5 minutes. So in 5 minutes you have the basics, and then it can go quite deep. You can do all sorts of interesting things with that, all the way to location-based games with text. So it's a very flexible, powerful platform. And hopefully when I will join you all in Venice, we can explore a little bit together and do a little bit of a game jam with Twine. Final last mention of the Atlas White Box. If you're interested in board games, this could be, of course, a viable thing as well. Atlas White Box is something to check out, because there's essays on game design for board games, and there's all sorts of interesting little things that you can start to prototype your board games with. Of course, after that you want to move to a production stage, but this is very nice for prototyping. So to wrap up this last section, past play for the public can be done by playing in public. Right? I think in general, it would be good for archaeology as a discipline to play more in public. These can be games, but these can also be playful approaches to archaeology in other ways, right? Playing with the public, for example, as we did through Minecraft, but there's all sorts of other ways that you can play archaeology while still being serious, while still being about knowledge and content and the values that you want to transmit with the public. And of course, another thing that you can do, as I spoke about in the last time, and I hope to do with you soon, is making playgrounds for the public. So final thing I want to say is that there will be once again an interactive past conference in November. That you'll be able to find more information about that on the website interactivepast.com, and this will be online and offline. And we have a program with about 18 speakers across 2 days talking about this particular topic, so the past and play in a many different sort of constellations. So feel free to join us online for that one in November. Thank you.
Sorry, the mic. Thank you very much, Angus.
Thank you.
Big clap from my side, but I think everyone really enjoyed your fantastic talk. Really, you open up to so many reflections that are so deeply involved in the way that we use and communicate the past. Absolutely. I was so impressed about the numbers. So how many hours we play, or how many hours we spend in activity that are fun activity like that, comparing with the museum, and how big is the audience that we are missing as a scholar, as communicators, as also as university, in not considering how we are using the past in a broader way. But I don't want to be the only me speaking. So please, if there are questions, observations.
I have a question.
Yeah.
May I? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Angus. I have to say that I usually do not play with games, but I see my husband every day, and I'm pretty sure that it is enough.
Sure, to get an understanding, yes.
I found your presentation very interesting, especially because I see that video games are an element and a product also that led to the contemporary material culture. So, I mean, a subject that can be studied by archaeology. And also interesting, especially for the power of narration, if I can use this terminology here, that a story via game can have, instead of narration realized in all the other ways that seem very traditional artifacts to me now, once I have seen your. So I have a question about the end. I'm not a gamer, so I'm wondering if your games have an end as the story have, I suppose, an end that reflect the past, or many different ends, or they are kind of never-ending story, or is the end really just defined and means in an historical game? And in the case you don't have an end because of many reasons, for instance, because in the past you don't have an end, or because the story is still continuing today, I don't know, it's not finished. Do you have a common aim, maybe related to preservation? I mean, how to balance the relation between imagination and the real events? So I think that find the right end is an important challenge, don't you think so? Which is your approach from this point of view? Thank you.
That's a very interesting question, because so one of the things I also use twine, for example, in the classes that I teach. I ask people that study history or archaeology students to write twines. Then one of the things they always have a very hard time with is sort of moving away from the fact that something has to be always has to happen the way it happened in history, right? And I think one of the things that games are really good at is allowing us to explore alternative histories. And so you always want to be able to delineate that an alternative history is not a factual history, but there's still a lot of power in exploring alternative histories. At the same time, what you're also talking about is the idea that games have to have ends. And that, I think, is one of those ways that will always end up, that's not a pun, but will always make games a model of the past, right? So, I mean, there's open-ended games, definitely. There's lots of, these things are more like virtual worlds, right? Games like World of Warcraft or other sorts of big social games often that don't really have an end. Some also single-player games, but the vast majority of games have end states, right? it's a game over, so you lose all your lives, or at the end you win, right? So that's more or less the two end states, and that is something that is in game design from very early on, right? The very earliest games had ends, but they don't necessarily have to have that, right? But simply because of the tradition of game design, this is what always is somewhere in, there's always this goal-oriented thing. And one of the things that I think would be interesting, and something that we can really contribute as historians or as humanists, is to provide all sorts of alternative visions of what games could be as mechanics, right? As saying, like, maybe this game doesn't have to have an end. Maybe it's interesting if it just, these systems keep on playing with each other forever, like systems in our histories are playing with each other forever. So this is just one example that I can say, like, this is where really we could come up with some interesting game mechanics aside from game stories, right? That could enrich the ways that we make and also play games.
Thank you. There is also another question from Alice, I see on the chat.
Good afternoon. Actually, I was a player when I was younger. I used to play to StarCraft and Baldur's Gate, and I'm a little bit surprised because I think that the narrative behind this kind of game is a little bit different. And of course, one is fantasy and the other one is science fiction, fantascienza.
Mm-hmm.
But in some way, I find them something like open history with some game with an open history system, something like that. So not truly ending game, not that put the player in front of different choices, and so my question was, why is it not possible, or there is not there is not something similar for historical games? Why the narrative seems so traditional historical game?
Yeah. So definitely. Science fiction games, right? Like StarCraft, right? What you will see is that I think even games like that will end up building a lot of their imagery or their mechanics from real world history still, right? Because there still has to be some sort of connection, and they use that in a much more loose way to make a game story happen, or in particular to make this virtual history, this completely science fiction history. But it's true that I mean, I wouldn't say that these games are very, very different in terms of what they end up doing with the way that we tell histories, in this particular case about a fictional past and a fictional universe, than a game like Age of Empires, for example, right? Age of Empires, yeah, I mean, it's okay. Well, tell me, what is the big difference between a game like a historical game like Age of Empires to you?
I mean, maybe I'm thinking more to Baldur's Gate.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so of course it's role play, so you have different opportunity. I mean, Baldur's Gate 1 or Baldur's Gate 2, and you are put in a strong system of narrative. I mean, but you have many choices. Yeah. You can develop many ways, and I played when I was younger, and I play also with Age of Empires, and I think what I can see in Age of Empires is that you have only one way to develop the game. And with that, a certain kind of narrative, in some way, maybe linked with civilization too, with the concept of civilization too in Age of Empires. So without relation of some.
No, it's an interesting point that you make. So even a game that is now more role-playing game-like, because that's Baldur's Gate and those types of games. There's role-playing games, right? Even a game that's more role-playing, like Assassin's Creed. These are the more where you can play a character and there's some role-playing elements. It's very much about going through a single story, and there's very few historical RPGs out there. There's a very relatively famous one, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend playing because you'd end up supporting some alt-right kind of people. That's Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is a game. It's a very interesting premise. It's set in Bohemia, and you're just playing this otherwise traditional RPG, but just without any sort of fantasy elements to it. It's really about playing in Bohemia. The problem is that, according to the creative director of the game, it was impossible that there was any other color of skin than white in Bohemia at that point in time. So it's a very sort of problematic game from other perspectives. But what it is that is historical RPG. And I think that's one of the things that is nice about Twine, which is this text-based game, which will not look like something like Baldur's Gate ever, but it will allow you to create these different outcomes, explore these different processes, quite literally look at the interactivity that could be part of our games. You could even still get to the same ending with a game like Twine or with a historical RPG, just to very different perspectives. And I think that's an untapped potential when it comes to historical games, is role-playing games, and particularly maybe also role-playing games in which it's not always about fighting a war, but maybe it's about other things, right? Like living a life in a medieval village, or living a life in Venice in the 14th, 15th, 16th century, or longer ago, right? Those, I think, are games also that are more narratively driven, but still interactive. So there's still different stories possible that I think will also, once again, be something that will play much better for a larger audience, right? The idea of these costume dramas that you could watch, or historical dramas that you could watch, but then make them interactive, make them playable. So I think there's a huge field to be won there for games, and also for the past.
Yes. There is other question. Very happy. Otherwise, I have a quite tough one.
Tough one, oh dear. Please another question. Please another question.
It is a tough in terms that is it entails an opinion. What do you think about all these games produced by museums or cultural institutions, generally in the framework of European project or a public found system? For example, we have in Italy a quite famous one, the National Museum of Naples. I don't know if you know, Father and Son is the name of the game. That is quite... it had also some prizes. I don't remember which one, but it is quite popular. But these, if I can try to summarize what I'm meaning with this game, are games produced directly by the cultural institution. They are highly didactic and pedagogic, so there is a lot of information stuff inside, so presenting artifacts, sites, history, blah, 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 blah. So if you also, for example, for that one that was mentioned, that is nice graphic, and also is also is witty, because you have to, for ending it, you have to go physically in the museum and type something. Yes. So you have to interact with the museum spaces. So otherwise you are not able to end your mission. Mm-hmm. But anyway, you have to read a lot of boring stuff that you skip and say, I want to play. I skip it, and I want to see what it is. What do you think? That is worth it to invest in such a thing or not?
It is a very it's a very loaded question, because I understand that there's a lot of people that are invested, or organizations that are investing in it. I think well, to put it like this, you can get lucky, or you can also have all the right ingredients that will get you to that game that will win prizes, that is also loved by the public, etc. It is possible, but it is also very it's going to be unlikely, because most of the time the budgets that are available for this are too little to work with professional game developers, and which in the end you will need to do that unless you have all the skills available in your institution. And we're talking here, especially if you want to make something that is 3D artists, you have to have narrative designers, you have to have game mechanic designers, you have to have people that can code extremely well. most institutions simply don't have that in their home, so they have to work with external people somehow, or they will have to have a long development time of multiple years. So you have to have some sort of capital, basically, right? Either in people or in money. And most of the time, it's something that there's like maybe 10,000 euros set aside for something like this. Well, 10,000 euros will buy you roughly one month of development for one person in a AAA game studio, right? That's sort of what it costs to keep one game designer running in a game. So the costs here involved are immense. I think that there's one of the things that we should look at is not every institution wanting to make their own game, but really band together and make a framework of games, right? And things that you can then just use in different locations, or adapting games that are already out there, right? And then for example, like Minecraft, right? You can do a lot of fun stuff with Minecraft, and you can still do a lot of knowledge transmission if you want to. And at the same time, what you're also pointing to, I think, is the fact that people in museums or historians or archaeologists, they try to cram these games full of information, right? Things to learn. And that's precisely, of course, not the thing that you're always interested in when you're gaming at first and foremost, right? And it's also not the thing that games are really good at, right? It's not like reading a book. You're experiencing something. So some things you will pick up, some things you will just brush over like you would do in your normal life, right? So there, I think especially the text heaviness and sort of we want to show you things that you have to read, or artifacts that you have to really like understand as if you're an archaeologist yourself. They don't really work. So first thing is for educational game that is successful in terms of numbers, first thing is fun. Make the game fun.
Yeah.
Afterwards, put in the information, or make sure that the fun also is able to link up the information. It's a very interesting but also difficult design challenge.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with you, because I had also the opportunity to sit in a couple of committee that had to decide about it, and I found that every time you want to have something fancy that you think that will attract young crowds and so on, but it's not enough saying that I want to do a game for producing something that actually could be of interest, could be played by a certain amount of people. Otherwise, you ended up to have a boring something that is not a game, that is not fun and play.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the other consideration that I really like to stress is the idea of fun of the past, fun and past. While you were doing your lecture, I was thinking something that my mother used to say to me, have you to play with your trowel and things, and she used the Italian word giocare, and I think she used in the right way, so playing also culturally. But in somehow, when we do archaeology and when we do history, we play with information, and the pleasure that we have in making them work in terms of being able to narrate narratives, or getting from them new question to go on with the research and so on, is the thing that we have to also to communicate to our public, because that part of the fun is the fun of the research. So I think this is also under consider when we look at this kind of word, gaming and the past. You know that.
No, it's one of the things that is very interesting to do, and I think we can do more of that, is to communicate to the public, maybe through games, but through other ways possible as well, that we're having a lot of fun studying the past, and that it is fun to know about the past. And often what has happened is I'm answering Diego, but I think he's done.
Yes.
You're back now. Okay. So
sorry, I'm back.
I think what we have traditionally done as archaeologists is, especially we were talking about the 19th, 20th century, but even much later than that, is we've had a lot of fun with ourselves, by ourselves, right? Just focusing on the fun that we get from archaeology. And we haven't focused enough on bringing that fun and communicating how fun it is, as well as in other ways valuable, to know about the past and to get to quite literally touch and experience the past. I think that if we are able to combine, and games are always one way that we can do that, is to, if we can start communicating the fun that is in the past, that idea of care, commitment, and attention towards the past, that would be a great way of communicating with a larger audience.
Yeah. Really, thank you again. There are other questions.
Question. Yeah, Andrea, please.
Yeah.
Are you here?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank
We
you.
are seeing you. You can turn on the mic, Andrea. No, the mic is still off. Somehow. I try to. Unfortunately, Andrea, the mic is still off.
Can you?
Otherwise, you can type.
Or you can make. Can you unmute her as well?
Oh.
Probably.
But probably she will rejoin us.
Right. This is also part of the fun of online meetings,
Andrea,
right? There we are. Yes. So maybe one of you as moderators can unmute her.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Oh, you can type in the chat, Andrea.
That works too.
That's not a problem.
Yeah, I'm trying to
write your question. Yeah.
Your mic, but I can't. Yeah. Try with time. While you are typing, I was just another very interesting notes from the talk. That is this idea of colonialism that is possible to trace on the civilization gaming approach. That I never thought that is so strong, and probably it is something that is very like also to many other popular way to tell the past. It is big documentaries that pass through cable TVs or videos that we have on the internet, his idea of progress, civilization, and so on. So this is a very interesting topic to think about. Also, where we are, in a general knowledge of the past.
Yes. And I think in general there, I think something else than to sort of recognize that it is there in so many ways. It's also interesting to ask quite of a dangerous question is why is it fun to us to play colonial narrative?
Yeah.
Right. And that is exactly to maybe some, but most of these games don't allow you to destroy the colonial narrative. You can just play it, right? And a lot of people have fun with this. And the question, I think, the quite literally deep personal sometimes, but also at a societal level question is why is it fun to why are these games that are very much a recreation of colonial or imperial narratives so much fun? Why do people play 1.2 billion hours of a game like that, right? And that's I'm not anywhere near to answering that question, but I think it's a culture historical and a societal question that is interesting to explore as well as archaeologists and as historians.
There is a lot of things that we can learn about the way that we perceive us in the civilization time frame using video game more than other system, because there is somehow made simple and crystallized, crispy, so it's easy to see because you have everything that you have to build yourself and so on. So the idea that there are behind is quite clear. So thank you, Andrea, for your question.
Is it there? Is it there? All right. Sorry, I didn't scroll yet to the bottom. So so is there such a thing as a game based on counter-hegemonic history? Oh yes. So it's interesting that there are a lot of games like this, counter-hegemonic histories, but most of these games are what you would call indie games, so made by artist-like small collectives of game developers or sometimes even individuals. And if you're interested in those, I can give you a lot of different examples. One of the things that is not necessarily counter-hegemonic, but is a very interesting game to check out for what it did, is a game that is called Never Alone, which is a game that was made by or it was produced by an indigenous Alaskan tribe, together with a professional game development company. And it really shows how you can take certain aspects of game mechanics. So it's a platform. It's like you're playing a Mario game, and then but then they manage to infuse it with a lot of their own cultural tellings and histories, particularly the origin narrative that they're, or the oral tradition that they're sharing there. So that's a very interesting game to check out. And then when it comes to other games, there's, I think, queer gaming history is a very interesting subset of this history and gaming field. And there's a couple of very interesting game designers there. I would, if you're interested in queer gaming, then one of the things to check out is Robert Yang, who's a developer that made a whole game about the tea room, and that was one of the meeting places. I forgot which American state it was, but one of the meeting places in a toilet for gay men in the 60s. And the game mechanic there is that you will want to have this gay encounter, but at the same time there's going to be police that are also patrolling this particular space. And the idea is how to spot the policeman before you engage in gay sex with that person, and make sure, because otherwise you get arrested, right? Or at least that was the case in the 60s. So this is this beautiful, historically contextualized game that displays on a lot of game mechanics that are we know, right, like hide and seek almost, but is also very much counter-hegemonic, I would say. So there's a lot of there in the indie sphere in particular. So if you're interested, just send me an email. I can send you a list.
It seems that your mic is working, Andrea.
Oh, it's working. Oh, okay.
Oh, there you go.
After I type, went to trouble to type. Yeah, thank you. So you would say maybe that the fact that they're indie means that they're not as commercially successful or attractive, because by indie you mean that they're not making as much money, right, as the ones that have tales of conquest and colonialism and more neoconservative sort of entity.
Generally speaking, they don't make as much money. They can be commercially very successful, but it's more that and it's a bit of a flexible term, but it's more like a moniker that certain game studios adopt. It also quite literally means that they're independent, so they can choose, for example, what publisher they will want to go for. And they are, they're just, and then to be smaller collectives. So the games that are like Civilization, but Assassin's Creed in particular, are made by studios that are literally 1,000 or more people work on a game like that. So, and then indie games, smaller, often less graphically sort of wowing, but still very interesting as games, and can be very popular. And there's just a lot of them. There's a lot of indie games. There's a lot of games out there, and not all of them sort of rise to the top.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much to everyone. I think we should wrap up because it's 4:30. I'm so sorry because I will go on with a lot of questions. I take note of so many things that so I'm seeing my next weekend completely stuck in front of the video, try to do something with making or playing some games. So
excellent.
Thank you very much, Angus. Really, it was a really great presentation, and I'm sure that we will re-enjoy it live playing together in Venice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Stay happy, and of course, stay healthy as well, and play more, I would say.
Yeah.
Oh, I love your arrows behind you, Angus.
Oh yes, yes, for sure. That is something that I also on occasion play with, only in shooting ranges. So not in the comfort of my own home.
I see a lot of compliment on the chat from everyone.
Thank you all.
So
thank you all.
Really, thank you, Angus, and see you soon.
See you soon.
If you want to remain, we'll go on with, but you're not forced, with our lab, that is Crazy Lab, about the global lockdown object biography that we are doing together with our class. But probably, Elisa, we take 5 minutes.
Of course, Diego, we need to do.
We need
2 minutes.
We need.
Sounds very interesting, but unfortunately, I have to pick up my my daughter from daycare.
If it's going well, we will send you the link of the final work. We pick up everyone representative object of our lockdown, and
nice,
describe itself Mine is a bottle of rum.
Good choice. Could be mine as well. Very good.
Thank you again, and let's meet at 16:40, so in 7 minutes, something like that. Thank you again. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.